Thank you for coming to our second webinar on Brightspace. In today's session, we'll be talking about the content tool. Presentation is hosted by myself, Thomas, and Lauren, who is in the chat. Liz also has some problems with logging in.
Yep, I'm on it.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
We'll be covering a number of topics today. We'll be focusing on the specific functionality of the content tool, comparing it primarily to its closest equivalent in Vula, which is the lessons tool. We'll be talking about how the content tool works, how to add things to it, what its function is, the role of instructional text in the content tool, using it to build learning pathways, some of the differences in its sort of design philosophy. So Brightspace and Vula treat these two similar tools a little bit differently. A couple of other tools as well, which are linked to the content tool more closely than other tools in Brightspace. And hopefully we'll have time to talk about some of the advanced features as well, which are kind of the nice to haves and very nice to haves that Brightspace offers over Vula. We're not going to be talking about things like building assignments or building quizzes or building discussions. Those will come in future webinars. They need a little bit more time. We'll be focusing specifically on the content tool. Likewise, we won't be going into detail of creating like the supplementary kind of content, for instance, surveys, checklists, looking at external tools like Padlet or Gradescope, or talking about class communications such as announcements and the new intelligence agents tool. These will all be covered in future webinars. I will say that for many of these tools, assignments, quizzes, discussions, rubrics, they are actually very similar to Vula. So while it's very important to be familiar with the tools, if you have a basic understanding of how they work in Vula, you'll have a pretty good solid understanding of how they work in Brightspace. And you just need to familiarize yourself, via practice. Okay. And then just before we get into the meat of the presentation, we want to say one thing on course migration and just a statement of positionality. Start with migration. How migration will work for all Vula courses, for the pilot courses, for those of you who are on pilots, and for the courses we'll be migrating during the second semester, is this is an automated process. The Vula team here does a bit of techno wizardry and gets the content from Vula into Brightspace into a new course site. It's a two-phase process. It goes into a holding site first, where the learning design team, myself, Lauren, and our colleagues then check the content, noting anything that has migrated weirdly or we think may need attention. Then we'll have a meeting with you or with the future course conveners for 2023, and then do the full migration into the actual course site itself, where the build and adaptation can happen. Currently, there are 1 or 2 outstanding courses which haven't migrated from the pilot process. Well, there's about 6 or 7. This seems to be largely due to their size. So courses which have a lot of video content, that content isn't migrating quite as nicely as it could. We're going to try and get that all resolved by the end of this week, or possibly by Monday next week. But sort of long and short of it is, you don't need to worry about rebuilding things in Brightspace unless you want to do that. There's of course an option, but in most cases, most tools are transferring across with a high degree of accuracy and completeness. There's a couple of things, for instance, if you had an assignment which had turned in Vula, you have to reassign that to turn it in Brightspace. Sometimes attachments get dropped from discussion topics and so forth. But largely the migration process works pretty well. That being said, we are in a sense moving houses from the Vula house to the Brightspace house. And while the houses all have the same things, they have a front door, they have a kitchen, they have a bathroom, the layout's a little bit different. So there will be some work needed to just jostle things into how Brightspace kind of operates, its grammar, its layout, as you whatever you prefer. But generally speaking, you won't have to create new or recreate content. And then lastly, statement on positionality. What I mean by this is We are presenting from a particular perspective, and that is learning designers. We work with large numbers of courses, ranging from first-year courses to master's courses. So we see a wide variety of courses. We also help new lecturers coming in who inherit course sites from previous years. And so our design perspective is informed by that. Sometimes you might find our approach a bit pedantic, or saying, I'm sure there's an easier or faster way to do this. Yes, there absolutely is, but we do think that our approach builds the most rigorous and organized way of building sites, which can then be opened up to, for example, external examiners, so they can navigate the site pretty easily without having to sit with someone. We also deal with a lot of sites which have evolved over time, have been running on Vula for years and years now, which have a lot of redundant tools that are no longer used, or have resources folders which really meander and have content from 5 years ago that's no longer used. So this moving house is also an opportunity to jettison the stuff we no longer use, to look at some new tools, to freshen up a bit. Yeah. So you may find in this process, particularly if you're teaching at a postgraduate level, masters and honors, a lot of this content isn't all that useful for you, because your students don't actually need a lot of teaching. You need a place to put assignments, you need a place to put resources, but they don't really need to be taught in the same way the first year does. If so, we completely understand if some of this seems like, well, I don't really need to use all of this, do I? Of course, you are the educator, you have control over your course sites. Okay. Before we talk to the content tool, we have to talk about the file management in Brightspace. Like those who've been to my lessons webinars, we start off talking about resources. Same thing, before we can talk about content, we need to talk about manage files. To navigate to manage files, and there will be demonstrations of all these in a moment, we go to our course admin tool and we go to our manage files thing. Manage files is mostly similar to resources. It's a storage area for all of your course files. So everything you put into Brightspace goes into manage files. This includes things like attachments on assignments or discussions, for example. Like in resources, you can create multiple subfolders and subfolders and subfolders and so forth. We do kind of recommend that you try and trim those down a bit, not to make too many levels of subfolders, just for simplicity's sake. But of course, this will depend on your particular course design. Very importantly about this tool, and this is probably the first big divergence from Butler, resources is not accessible to students and cannot be made accessible to students. This is a file management back-end administrator and lecturer tool. It's not for students to go to. This means you don't need to worry about making hidden folders or changing permissions on some folders, not others. The whole tool is inaccessible to students. You put the content there, and then you start sharing that content via the content tool. So it's a two-step process, as opposed to what you might be familiar with, where you just put everything into resources and tell students to go to resources to find the content. Our recommended approach, if you are wanting to start anew or you're creating a new course site, is creating one folder per unit. And if you don't have like a predefined idea what a unit is, we say it's generally one folder, one unit is one teaching week. So if you run a 13-week course, you'd have 13 unit folders with the appropriate levels of subfolders underneath them. For instance, it might be unit 1, and under unit 1, you have your readings, and you have another folder for videos, and you have another folder for images and attachments, for example. Like I said, though, the migration process does move over what you already have. So if you have a predefined resources folder structure that works for you, that will be migrated as is into manage files in Vula. In Brightspace. Okay, and now we can finally talk about the content tool. The content tool, it's the first, and in some cases even really the only thing students can see. It's very possible to build a completely complete and very sophisticated Brightspace site where students only go to one tool to see everything. I'll show you what that means in a moment. But it's the last thing that you should build as a lecturer. Chris, I do acknowledge your question. I'll get to that in a moment. So what the content tool's purpose is to guide students through the course by building learning pathways, linking all the different kinds of learning activities that you would want them to do. For instance, watch this video, read these readings, do this assignment, answer this discussion question in your forum, complete this quiz, go out to this particular website and read it and so forth, and scaffold all those activities with instructional text. Instructional text being that information which tells them how to do those things. So you could have something like, welcome students, this is the module on shear qualities of metals. We're going to get started by watching this video from YouTube. While you're watching the video, please bear in mind the following questions. Once you've watched the video, please take the short quiz. Remember, this is a timed quiz, so you need to complete it within 30 minutes. Once you're done with the quiz, check out these readings and go to the assignments tool and complete your first assignment for the course. So all of this is, organizing all your other learning tools together and building them into a followable structure called learning pathway. In that, it's very similar to the lessons tool in Vula, with elements of the resources tool. So it is a place where you share files, and does a couple of overlaps with the overview tool as well, which was a little bit of an old tool in Vula anyway. It has a 3-tiered approach. You have units at the top, underneath them are lessons, and underneath them are folders. You can think of them as a top-level page and 2 sub-levels of sub-pages. And because you can make links to all your other tools, your surveys tool, your assignments tool, your quizzes tool, etc., in your content tool, it is actually quite possible to build a course where students only go to your content tool to access everything in their course. So it makes navigation very, very straightforward. It also tracks student progress through that, so they can actually see very quickly and easily where they are in the course and where they need to go next. And ideally, although we know that in practice, things often need to change on the fly, the content tool is the very last thing you build in the course design process. So you first set up your gradebook. You first get your files organized in your Manage Files tool. You set up your assignments, or even just draft versions of your assignments. You set up your quizzes, any discussions you might be having, get your surveys done if you're going to be using surveys or self-assessments. Build all of those tools first, and then right at the end of the process becomes the content tool, and we slot them all together into a learning pathway. Okay. I'm going to just look quickly at Chris's question. Share files with students, tens of files for assignments. All these need to be hyperlinked and accessible, as we currently use hidden folders. Yes, we will show you how to add files specifically to the content tool in a moment, Chris. Yeah. Okay. The thing which is kind of unique to the content tool, which isn't just a different tool in Vula, because once again, the content tool is like a container and a guideway, a pathway through all the other different tools, is instructional text through something called, and we've complained many times to the Brightspace team, but they won't change it, HTML documents. It's an awful, awful name, but it's a decent tool. HTML documents are, I hate the word, but they provide instructional text, scaffolding, like we said, all the different learning materials and learning activities. We have a range of different preset templates that we've designed. So you can quickly pull up, for instance, a module introduction template, write some text on how students should be working through the module, letting them know that in this module, they'll need to complete a quiz, read 4 readings, watch a video, submit their very first assignment or whatever. And then other types of templates, which we'll show you in a moment, which have some instructional text examples to make the course kind of look similar across courses and to build things quite quickly and easily. And then last thing before we go into demonstration purposes, and here's another kind of phase shift, mental adjustment needed in Brightspace. So the first one is this change between manage files and resources. The second one is Brightspace kind of natively wants to chunk content. This will become more obvious when we show you in the demonstration terms. But what this means is in Vula, if you're using your lessons pages, you could create one long lessons pages with links off it to readings and to videos and to assignments and so forth. You could cover a whole week's or even a whole month's worth of content in a single lessons page. You can do that in Brightspace, but it's not what it likes to do. Brightspace preferentially wants to break up that longer page into smaller chunks arranged in the sequence that you're supposed to do them. It looks a bit better. Brightspace is a mobile-first platform, so it's optimized for use on mobile devices, and that works a bit better on mobile devices anyway. It's very hard for a student to scroll through a very long page and link off it, rather than having it broken into smaller pieces. And it also facilitates, using the chunked approach, facilitates the more advanced Brightspace features. For instance, student progress tracking, things called release conditions, which is a much more advanced version of Vula's requisites tool. So you can make certain parts of the site available only if students have accomplished certain other bits. And you can use things like intelligent agents, which are automated reminders sent out based on student progress. So while you don't need chunk content into Brightspace, I'm going to show you two versions of an unchunked content unit and a chunked content unit. It's how the grammar of the platform works. It wants to chunk things kind of inherently. Okay, before I go into the demonstration and acknowledging Chris's question, is there anyone who would like to just ask anything else? Or shall I just jump in? Okay, let's go to the demonstration. All right, so I'm in my sandbox. Most of you, hopefully, unfortunately, except for a couple of people, Liz and Muya, you should have access to Brightspace and access to your own sandbox site. Sandbox, you place no students attached to it, you can do what you want, it's a place to play around. If you find yourself building something in your sandbox that you really like, it is very easy to move content between sites. So you can actually start building, if you have some time in your hands, you can start building entire modules into your sandbox already, and that work won't be lost. I'll show you how to do that at the end of the presentation. But for now, we recommend that you stay in your sandbox site, play around with it, test out various things, see how it looks. And the work that you do there, if anything is useful, won't be lost. So I'm on my Brightspace site. Over here, we have our nav bar. This is pretty much equivalent to your left-hand sidebar in Vula with your various different tools. The main one's going to be, of course, going to be like content. Activities is where you have your, in mine's called essays. I changed that, please ignore it. Assignments, discussions, and quizzes. Course info is where you find your class list, any groups you are attached to, and the announcements. And manage course is where you, as people who build the course or administrators, will be spending most of your time. In fact, the course admin tool here is really where every single tool in Vula is. So while you're building, you'll be navigating mostly to here to build things, for instance, building a rubric, or making a new discussion, allocating students to groups and so forth, managing the files. But we're going to talk about content. So content, your top level, which is, let's bring up Vula very quickly, which is going to be roughly equivalent to your top level lessons page, are called units. So these things, these colored bars over here, those are equivalent to, yeah, these top level lessons pages on the side here. So those are your units. Underneath your units, you can add either your content directly, like we've added here, or you can create subgroupings of content. For example, basically sub-pages in Vula. We won't be showing those in the moment. It's very easy. You just add a new, what they call lessons, give a title, and say this is day 1. And you can see under our unit 1 now, we have this various content, and we have day 1 where we can add other content. Don't worry too much about this. This is kind of an organizational principle. As mentioned before, yep. So this is like a lessons page in Vula would look. We have some information on top. We have instructional text, reading, and the instructional text for said reading, and a link to said reading. A video, the instructional text of the video, link to the video. Discussion, link to discussion, essay, link to that essay, quiz, link to said quiz. So this is entirely possible to build your lessons like this in Brightspace, using this as an HTML document, giving it this template, which is the content template, and adding things to it. What Brightspace wants to look like, though, just in terms of its design philosophy, is something a bit more like this. We have an HTML document over here, and we're just over here laying out the learning objectives for this particular module. A bit of text introducing the acquisition type of activities. So in this case, we have our readings and our video. And here we have our reading. And here we have our video. Another HTML document, just outlining the activities that students need to complete. You can see this is very basic. Link to the discussion, link to the quiz, link to the assignment. Now that's the lecturer view of that particular tool. The student view looks a little bit different. So when a student looks at the site, what they will see is something like this. You can see these top level units are these blue bars, and inside them is the content of said blue bar. So this was that very first long run-on page. Here we go. And if a student is working through this, they go to the reading, they click on the link, here's the reading. Perfect. They have the video over here, and they have links to their discussion, to their assignment, to their quiz. So if they clicked on any of those, they go directly to the quiz, for example. So you can see how a student could actually stay in this content tool. It's linking out to all of these different tools elsewhere, but they can navigate through the whole thing through that particular tool. But the design that is kind of recommended in Brightspace is rather to do something like this. So we have our chunked approach, which looks a bit more like this. We have our first HTML document page. We have some information on the readings. We have the reading. We have the video. We have some more instructional text. We have the discussion topic, the quiz, and lastly, the assignment. This may seem a bit confusing at this point. The point is here, and you can see actually, as the student works through that content, they actually, the system actually keeps track of what they have read and what they haven't. So a student can very quickly see, okay, where am I in the course? I was either, assignment 1, but I haven't yet posted to my discussion. I haven't yet completed my quiz. In this case, I actually have finished this assignment because I worked on this course before as the student. So progress tracking is very, very straightforward and very easy in Brightspace using this chunked approach. Whereas if we have this unchunked, well, we've visited this page, but doesn't say that we've completed any of the quizzes or done the discussion and so forth. So in Vula, we tend to put things into single pages and linked off. In Brightspace, we pull that apart, we put that into different chunks, and then Brightspace also makes it very easy then for students to see where they are, where they ended off. You can just continue there. This shows you the last thing you visited. And when you come to the end of the unit, it actually tells you what you've done and where you're going. So it's got like much more sophisticated tracking, kind of just inherently in the design of the tool itself. Any questions or comments at this point? Anyone? I'm going to start picking on people who don't get some questions.
Sorry, Thomas.
Thank you.
I just wanted to find out from you, are you as a lecturer also able to see where exactly the student is at? You know, with this chunked approach that you have where everything is ticked off so that the student comes back and know where they are.
Yes, but not quite the same way as this. There is a tool called class progress. That's for students to check. And then in the lecture review, there is a content reports tool, which you can see where a student is at any particular moment, or what they have done on a course. We won't go into depth of that because that's kind of like the site stats equivalent in Vula. But yes, there
But
is a way to check.
if I want to see, say for instance, I give a reading that students need to do in preparation for class tomorrow. And I want to see that everybody's actually read through the article.
Yeah.
Is there any way that I can do that?
Yes, we are still experimenting with that particular tool, but you would go to manage course and this thing called content reports. Over here, you can see the module 1, module 2. So there's this chunked approach, and you can see then who has visited it. So if you said, I want to make sure everyone has read this introducing the content tool, we can see how many people could have read it and how many people actually did read it, only the one. And by clicking on that, we find out who that particular person is.
Oh,
It's
okay.
this person. Yeah.
All right. Okay, that was going to be my next question, to find out if you can actually see who the persons are that didn't read it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Likewise, we could go to any particular user and find out what they've done. So we can see that Janet hasn't done anything on this course at the moment, for example. So yeah, there is an advanced packaging statistical tool in Brightspace, and it's much easier to use than the site stats was in Vula.
Thomas, there are a few hands up, so Gail, go ahead.
Thank you. So I really enjoyed the tracking of the progress. What I've realized though is when I was the student on your demonstration module, the last page I visited, even though I didn't spend any time on it, was marked as completed.
Yes.
And I was wondering if there's any kind of setup where we can say this page, a page is considered completed if you spend more than 30 seconds or a minute on it. Just so that we don't confuse our students in thinking they've actually read that content, but actually they should have returned to it. You see what I mean?
I do indeed. Not that I know of.
Okay.
And I think with all of these things, that can be pretty easily flubbed by someone opening the file, going off to make tea, having a conversation with the neighbor, coming back, and they spent 5 minutes on it and says it's marked done now. All kind of progress tracking based on things which students don't actively do, like a quiz or answer a question or tick off a checklist, is always going to be pretty easy to get around, even sometimes by accident by students. So I would never recommend trying to see who has read a reading. I would rather say who has answered the question that I put after the reading, and using that as my mechanism to see who's actually engaged the resource or not. So like active student doing rather than viewing. Yeah.
Fair enough, Thomas. I agree. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Thomas. And Lisa also has her hand up.
Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Thomas.
Morning.
Hi. So I just want to go back to resources. Resources in Vula, it sort of acts as a repository space for content. And then, we can extract it from there and kind of putting it into our lessons pages.
Yeah.
But with Brightspace, does that work the same way, or are we working directly in our lessons page?
in your content tool.
In the content tool, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's no sort of repository where we have to store something and then extract it from there just to make, it's kind of double. I don't know if that's, makes sense.
Yeah, this is a thought shift. So for anyone who's been in any of my presentations where I say hide your resources folder, that's essentially what we're trying to do. Well, it's built into the system now. We almost don't have a choice. To add things is very straightforward. So like, for instance, I'm just going to use the supplementary tool. We just go to add existing, find our course file in our manage files. Let's take, I don't know, that, and add it. So it's easy to add files. Chris's question about large numbers of files, I'll come back to that in a question about migration in a moment, because this is something new and it's just a new way of thinking as well. But broadly speaking, what we do tend to find with a lot of courses is people just dump a whole lot of things into resources. This way, content can still be dumped into managed files, but the specific resources that people need are then put into whichever particular module they should be reading. Do acknowledge that this is not how a lot of particularly postgraduate courses work, where they really do just need a place to put files. How the migration process currently works is that when we migrate a course, everything in the resources file is automatically added to a content module called resources. So essentially, we just duplicate what is in managed files into a content module called resources. So all your content is still there. That's it. We were trying to get people to move away from this process, the sort of content dump process, and more into this process where a particular resource is put into its context, where it needs to be with the other kind of instructional text and associated learning activities. Yeah,
that would be a great idea. But I mean, over many, many years of working in Vula, and a lot of content that's sitting in Vula at the moment that has probably been used over and over and over for different courses, to start a whole new process, like adding it into this chunked approach for the content tool, obviously deems quite a task, and the transition into Brightspace will then take a much longer time. But if we have, don't call it resources, call it something else, repository or whatever, just to get away from sort of the resources, so that it links or ties to Vula, and we don't want that to tie to Brightspace. So I don't know, we just might have to think of naming it differently, so that we can extract sort of content into this content tool.
Is your concern that moving content from Vula to Brightspace is going to be too much effort? Or a lot of effort, I'd say.
It's to have this stacking approach. There's no automated tool unless it is named the same and it can be linked in that way in this content tool and Vula resources tool. Even if you take resources and you put it into Brightspace, you need to obviously have a naming convention that would be able to extract the information into the content tool, which is the Brightspace space. But if we don't have that, then obviously we're going to have to extract it from somewhere, and to have the resources tool on Brightspace is going to deem easier to extract information and create the stacking approach. My question, I think, is more, do we need a repository as resources going forward in Brightspace, or is it just the resources that is coming, the resources tool, named tool that is coming over from Vula, so that we can do that extraction into the content tool, which is Brightspace?
So when we do migrate content, all of the content will become this resources tool.
Okay.
So that's just set in Brightspace. In future, when new courses, new materials added to the course for 2023, 2024, that will have to go through the process of adding it to manage files and then adding it to its specific folder or area.
Okay.
But
All right.
all the content does get pushed through, and it does become a content unit called resources already. So you don't have to do any of that manual work. It is done for you. Yeah.
Okay.
It's more a case of changing future practice than having to change
Yeah, the
everything right away.
existing, yes, the existing is it's obvious is going to come over, but going forward in the Brightspace space, I wanted to know if the resources still access that repository to hold information, or do we work directly into the content tool?
You'll be working directly into content. Yeah.
Content tool. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, this and chunking are the two biggest mental shifts. The other tools, assignments is assignments, is pretty much the same. It's this content tool that's going to take the most rethinking and reworking. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we have 20 minutes approximately. I do want to mention there are a couple of other options, for instance, linking to OneDrive or Google Drive, which is going to be particularly useful if you need to move large quantities of files in and out in a short notice, if you're constantly swapping out files. So there are a couple of other solutions for file sharing that we can explore with you. And as we go through this pilot process with you, your feedback is going to be very important to tell us how to, well, A, talk about this stuff, and B, the different kind of solutions that are going to work at different levels. Because if you are, changing files constantly, the managed files to content migration may not make the most sense for your particular course and teaching needs. And we will absolutely be able to explore different kinds of ways of working with you to make that work. Okay. Moving on to some other tools. Actually, let's take a moment. Let's take a step backwards. How to build any of these particular modules. So let's go into this supplementary tools module. Because the content tool is a place where everything kind of comes together, the best way to do it is to have created your assignment in the assignments tool, to have created your quiz in the quizzes tool, to have created in your course admin, which is basically your site setup, a survey that you want to run, or where's another one, a self-assessment that you want students to do. So ideally, you would build all of these things first, and then going to add existing and finding, for instance, the various different discussions you have set up and slotting it in there, or adding an existing self-assessment that you have designed and putting it in there. And that's how you add content into these content units. Ideally through add existing, finding assignment, discussion, quiz, checklist, external tool, or if you're using, like for instance, Gradescope, you add it there, a self-assessment or a survey, you add it there, and so forth. The exceptions to this add existing rule are going to create new. Please don't, please forget that you saw all of this stuff over here. I'll tell you one moment. But it's adding subfolders, which are your lessons, or your HTML documents, which are your instructional text. Before I mentioned there are a number of templates. Here are those templates. So for instance, there's a template for the course team. So this is like your equivalent of a contact list. Changing out the image for your own image, putting in your contact details, saying, well, I actually don't want people to know my phone number, but I'll put my email up there, and so on. Or I would like to use accordions, which are like drop downs. So I want to have something where students read, for instance, I don't know, read an essay over here and answer some questions over here, and then put said essay into here and put said questions into that accordion dropdown. We have a number of different ones. If you use nothing else, the basic page is just a very basic page. We do suggest that you use these rather than just creating a new one and just typing directly into here. For one, it doesn't look very nice. For two, all of these templates are tested for accessibility and for mobile visibility in particular. So for students who will be using their mobile devices, these templates are sized correctly, the text is organized well, all the headings actually have headings, so people with screen readers can read them and so forth. And using something like a basic module introduction to introduce students to a new module, basic pages to describe things, or content if you want to put links to the content directly into the page. And if you get fancy, you can use something like that accordions thing for dropdowns. Yeah. Okay. I mentioned before, please ignore that you can actually add a new assignment, a new discussion, or a new quiz, or a new checklist directly from this add new. You can absolutely do that. It just takes you to said tool, for instance, into the assignment tool, and then you start creating a new assignment. The reason why we recommend quite strongly against this is this approach may seem very fast, but it does mean you may be mislabeling your assignments. Your assignments might not be linked properly to your gradebook if you're using that, or might have the wrong rubric attached. So it's far better to try and build all those things first, or even to just build all the relevant tools for week one first, and then putting them into the order that you want to put them into your module, rather than starting off with the content tool and saying, okay, I'm going to create a new quiz here, a new assignment here, and so forth. It may seem pedantic, but we do recommend it. When you create a new piece of material, you will see that's got a little eye icon on it saying it's hidden from students. Everything you create in Brightspace is by default hidden until you unhide it. So you can start off on your Brightspace site and start working on it directly into it without being worried that students will be seeing the new things that you're adding to it. When you're ready to unhide that, we simply click that eye icon. When we want to hide it again, we click it again. We can do that in the entire module level as well. Hide this entire module or make the module visible. So much, much easier than Vula to hide and unhide content. Likewise, if I realize, oh, I don't want this survey here, I actually want that at the end of my module, I simply drag and drop it. Or if it's actually in the wrong module entirely, okay, this one you do actually have to open this thing first. And I actually want this in module 3. And drag and drop it to the right place. So much easier to make content and to pull it into the places it needs to be, or reorganize it kind of on the fly. Very, very quick and easy to do so. And lastly, if you want modules to be released on specific dates, this little drop-down menu over here, sorry, at the top level, you can edit any particular module and say when you'd like it to be available, beginning at a particular end or ending at a particular end. And you can do that for any tool in Brightspace. Yeah. So considerably easier to move things around, to hide and unhide content, particularly if you're using a chunked approach where things are kind of a bit more atomized and you can pull them and move them into new configurations very, very easily and quickly in Brightspace.
Thomas?
Go ahead.
We have a hand up from Yolanda.
Please go ahead. Yolanda?
You're very
hear me?
soft, Yolanda. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry about that.
No worries.
I just wanted to find out, you said that all these tools that you've just shown us now, that it's already preset on Brightspace, am I right?
All of this content here.
The templates that you're talking about.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the templates, I've got 3 courses that I need to do. How do I duplicate the templates so that I can use it in each of my 3 courses?
Okay, so your learning designer will kind of address this with you one-on-one in your actual meetings. What these templates are, they're just basically copy-pasted text. So when you choose a template, and you'll actually see it actually overwrites whatever you put into your current content, like so. So your learning designer will chat to you. When we are doing the migration, I'm getting better each time we do it, it pulls across some of the existing Vula templating if there is any. But it's probably going to be a process where you need to rework that. We do have some capacity in the form of postgraduate students who can help you do that for you, get your content into a nice looking shape. But that's something that needs to be discussed with your specific learning designer.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left. So in terms of the other tools, which unlike your big activities, your assignments, your discussions, your quizzes, kind of your core functionality, there are a number of tools that can only be accessed by students through the content tool. Checklists, very, very similar to Vula's checklists, pretty much the same thing. A tool called surveys, which is the same rough equivalent of the polls tool for those who used it. A lot of people use it for class representatives and also for course evaluations. This is a tool that takes a couple of steps to set up, but it's not too difficult to do. It's got Likert scales and all that kind of stuff. Pretty straightforward. Don't need to show it now, but it has the functionality of the polls and course evaluations. It's a tool called self-assessments, which draws from the same kinds of questions that your bigger, more central quizzes tool does, but is for students to check their own progress. So it's not for marks. It's more for students to choose an answer and get feedback on why that answer is right or wrong. So if anyone used the old questions tool on Vula lessons pages, this is the pretty much the rough equivalent of that. And likewise, if you're using external tools like Padlet or Gradescope or any of those things, you link to those through your content module. So you can put them exactly where they need to be, scaffolded on top and bottom with instructional text if needs be. And coming to the advanced features. So we've talked about hiding and unhiding content. In terms of moving content, we showed you how to move content within a course. Very straightforward. We just drag and drop content where it needs to be. If you need to pull content from a different course into Brightspace, that is also very easy. We go to our Manage Course and Course Admin tool. Remember, it's like site setup. We click on the import. We search for a course that we want to import from. Oh, come on. For instance, this one. And then we can either import everything from that site, or we can select the specific elements we want to copy. In Vula, you could copy like all quizzes across, or all assignments, or all lessons pages. In this one, we can actually choose which specific checklists and which specific content items you want to pull across, and which specific course files and grades, and so on and so on and so on. So like I said, if you want to start working in your sandboxes and you're actually making something you actually want to keep, don't feel you need to recreate that. Just ask one of the learning designers to help you, and we can show you how to pull that whole unit from one course into another. This is also going to be particularly useful for in the future, not right now, but for resources that are shareable across the whole department or the whole faculty. So if your faculty wants to create something with, for instance, a plagiarism declaration, a manual on how to use, proper lab safety instructions, how tutorials work across the faculty, etc., we could actually create that as a content module in a holding course, and then you can just pull that whole thing across into each of your course sites with a couple of button clicks. So a lot of useful functionality here for sharing and reusing content from other sites. It's much, much easier in Brightspace. And then lastly, the big one, which is release conditions. So for those of you who are familiar with the requisites tool in Vula, it's something like that. Requisites allowed you to say, release this content, this thing to students only when they have accomplished everything which was marked as required before that. In Brightspace, it's called release conditions. So we're going to take this quiz over here. And we're going to say this quiz, I don't want people to do this quiz until they have submitted their group project. And then you can actually add and create a wide variety of these. So in this case, because we only have the one condition, we've got this, we could say, I only want them to submit to that assignment and receive a grade value on that assignment of over 50%. Sorry about that, there was a phone call here. And you can kind of chain these either as an all, so they must submit and receive that, or you could say any. So they must have ticked the checklist item saying I've completed my work, or have completed the group assignment. Obviously, you could go a little bit crazy with this, but one useful functionality for this would be, for example, saying, I'm not going to release the link to today's MS Teams meeting until you have, in fact, completed the self-assessment activity and you've at least tried to do some work. Or I'm not going to release this particular video until you have completed the quiz and got at least 50% on the quiz. This, release conditions is quite easy to set up. It can apply to any tool, so any chunked item or to an entire module. You can create release conditions for a whole module. And unlike prerequisites, it's not a case that you have to do everything beforehand. You can have this specific content item is only available under these specific conditions. Thank you very much, Eloise. Thank you for coming. This also allows you to make branching learning pathways in your course. So for example, you could create a release condition saying, release remedial unit 1 for all students who got less than 50% on the first quiz, whereas everyone else goes straight to unit 2. And then that remedial unit 1 has, some additional readings, and it's got a link to an MS Teams session that students can go to ask some questions, and it's got a backup quiz that students can take. So you can actually make these different learning pathways. The students who are getting all they need, they don't even see that remedial module because they got more than 50%, and they move through the course organically, whereas the students who do need additional help can go into different pathways, or you can just restrict users based on you need to have done everything that I asked you to before you can move on to the next module or next unit or next course. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Are there any questions? Any hands up that I can't see?
Nope, no hands up.
Cool, then I'm going to start picking on people. Deshni, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Nothing from me, thanks, Thomas. I think I need to play around a bit and get used to it first before I figure out what questions I have.
Absolutely, yeah. And as mentioned before, you have your sandboxes to play around in. When your courses do get migrated, we're trying to pull as much from Vula as possible. And currently, what happens to the resources folder, it is replicated as a content unit in its entirety with the same structure. So that particular thing you don't need to learn quite just yet. Did I hear someone unmute? No, I didn't. And your learning designers hopefully have already contacted you to set up sessions to work how best to work with a content tool for your courses. Lastly, it may be the case, for instance, in this 5th year course, I've talked to this lecturer already, other than maybe doing a course orientation, he's basically not going to be using content. He's just going to be putting his resources there because almost all of his teaching happens in other spaces. That's a perfectly legitimate use of the tool too. For your 1st and 2nd years and 3rd years even, we suggest using this quite a lot. For postgraduates, it's maybe not so important, or for various kinds of service courses which do their teaching in different spaces. So there isn't one right way, but if you do want to use this tool, and we do suggest you use it, we can help you make it the most rigorous and according to sort of the logic that Brightspace wants to use. And thanks very much for the kind comments. Thank you, Gail and Imra. Okay. Please don't hesitate to contact your learning designer, or you can just email me if you don't know who that is, and I'll find out who it is for you. And good luck.
Thank you, Thomas. Linda has a hand up. If you have a few more minutes.
Absolutely.
Thomas, sorry, I just wanted to find out from you. If I was a contract staff member before, how will I access Vula with my new staff number?
Just Vula in general.
Yes, because you know, my contract staff number actually don't work anymore, and all of the information is obviously under that specified number. So I just wanted to know, is there a way in which I can retrieve my content on Vula under my permanent staff number?
Right. So I'm just putting links in the chat. That's the help link to help at Vula. Ask them if you could just send an email with your new staff number and your old, I assume a T number, or whatever your old contract was. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. The recording will be available if you would like to recap anything or take a look again. It was a lot, but as we always said with Vula, just keep practicing, playing around. Also go into the Pulse app, the Brightspace app, and take a look at that, what it looks like. Thomas put a link to the slides in the chat, and you can go through it in there as well. But we will see you in other webinars, hopefully, and we are here to help. So please do reach out with any questions if you have any at any point.